Hello, all my listeners out there in YouTube land. It is Am Lee, your everyday light worker, and I'm back with more discussion on the language around race or conversations around race in America, as well as the whole world over, as to why we can't really have any honest and authentic conversations on the topic. So I was watching the show Succession, that is this international hit. Everybody loves Succession. And it is about this billionaire family and how they behave with one another. And it's just wild because all of these people in this family are terrible, terrible people. So I was watching a show and I was wondering, why am I watching this show? It's a horrible show. All the people are horrible. Every episode that I watch, it just makes me feel bad. So why am I watching it? And then I stopped watching it. I watched like the first season and then I said, you know what? I don't want to watch this anymore. So now it's gone into season 4 and I wanted to see how it ended up. So of course I came to YouTube and I started checking out the reviews on it to see exactly how it had ended up. And so what I discovered, because on the YouTube video reviews, there's people who just watch the episode and they tell you, what they saw. But then there are people who are doing like an entire literary analysis on the episode or a season or sometimes a whole entire series. And I came across this King Lear analysis of it. And it was incredible because it's looking at it from a whole different perspective. So it's looking at what some people have said Succession is about, which is to say how it's about how late stage capitalism is just insane. It's crazy. And King Lear was about how the European monarch in the 1500s was changing. And so you would have to watch that King Lear video to get the full analysis on that. But it was like the monarchy was changing and people weren't sure about these changes. And it was like the monarchy was a decrepit and dying king. That's the metaphor, that really this whole institution is like a decrepit and dying king. It's acting crazy. It's doing crazy things. And we need, and as it falls apart, it's like, who's going to take it over? Who is going to do something new? What's coming next? And so we did get, I think that is what kicked off imperialism. The death of that European monarchy over in Europe was about, we need to do something new. So we're going to go out to other countries in the world. And that's how we came to slavery, which is all about race. So really quick synopsis on how we get to slavery via race. Prior to slavery being about race, over in Europe, it existed, slavery existed. It was more about class. It was more about, so what I'm saying is white people were enslaving other white people, right, over in Europe. And they didn't call them slaves. They called them serfs. But the idea was these people were just being ruled over by the people who were in power because, they just had more stuff. They just had bigger castles. They just had more land. They owned the land. And they said, this is my land. What you do on this land, you have to ask me about it. And if you watch the Game of Thrones, that really breaks down that whole system and how that worked. And I think the Game of Thrones is probably a very realistic account of how that went down, right? So, so what you had basically are class structures. And within those class structures, you have language being very, very powerful in determining who is in what class. Because, for example, if you were in that lower class, you couldn't read and you couldn't speak clearly and effectively in order to advocate for yourself. I mean, you could try, but a lot of times because you didn't know how to talk, because you didn't know this higher way of speaking, you weren't able to use language in a way that was powerful. So this is the first instance that we have of language being a way that you can control and hold power over others. If you could speak in a certain royal, highborn way, as they say on the Game of Thrones, then you had power. So what someone who is of that higher class has the power to do is shut down any kind of dialogue that they don't like. So you're not allowed to have any real and honest, authentic dialogue about people in power. You're not allowed, for example, to really say, well, they're fallible. They really aren't so great and wonderful. They really aren't ordained by God. You weren't allowed to say that. That was like considered heresy. And we have over time, like, for example, in America, we don't have those kinds of laws or rules or beliefs. In America, you can say whatever you want about people, kind of, sort of, not within any institutions. So institutions are really good at playing this game of silencing people. Instead of doing it by laws or outright oppression of people, don't you say this. You better not say anything against the queen or the king. God save the queen or king. That's a really European thing, that you can't say anything bad about the queen or king. I think that's still illegal in many European countries. I'm not sure because I don't live in Europe. But that was how they used to do it, and that used to be really, really effective. Let's say from the year 1000 to about the year 1500, and before the year 1000, for as long as those European monarchies have been in existence, that was the rule. But you come to the future, and we're in America, we're like, oh, we're not going to play these things. The First Amendment says you have the right, the freedom of speech and the freedom of press. And so, here in America, it was supposed to be different. But it really wasn't different, okay? So they just changed the environment a little bit so that when you speak to power, you still have to use this really formal language. And when power speaks back to you, it uses this really, really formal language where more often than not, it's not saying anything at all. It's saying empty things. It's using jargon. It's using, language that doesn't really mean anything. So when you start to really talk about race in an institution, that's what you get a lot of. Language that doesn't really mean anything. It's fluffy, it's evasive, it's nebulous. So that brings me to diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging. What do these terms mean? Diversity, inclusion, they could mean anything. And so there you have it. When institutions have decided a while ago, after this passage of the Civil Rights Law, institutions decided, quite a while ago that they were going to develop a language to talk about race that it doesn't really mean anything. And this makes it easier to have. You can try to get at honest conversations by using this meaningless jargon. And a lot of people do. A lot of people find this is a safe way to talk about race. Just use these words that no one really understands what they mean. So no one can really criticize you or take issue with what you say. And trust, even if you use this sort of language, the opposing side finds a way to find issue with even that language. So, for example, social justice was a term that I started to hear in the early 2000s. And I was like, what does this term even mean? I didn't understand it because I went to law school and I was always looking at these issues through the lens of the law. So we had a lot of legalistic jargon to deal with racism. I'm looking at it through the lens of what happens when you're dealing with racism at work or sexism at work or really any kind of otherism at work. I was always looking at that and through the lens of the law and the legal jargon. So when you started, and so at this time is when you start to hear these words of diversity, inclusion, and social justice really become more mainstream. And there was a lot of resistance to it because, quite honestly, people did not know what it meant. I know I didn't know what it meant. So I was like, I don't know about this diversity and inclusion. We already have the civil rights law. We already have all this case law that we have created to discuss these kinds of issues. What are we doing with this new language that we're creating to discuss racism? I didn't get it. But what I found was that when you started talking about that, when you didn't, that people found that jargon very, very threatening because people aren't stupid. People are intuitive. They're like, I sense that by talking about this, diversity and inclusion, you are changing the rules. And you are changing the rules to take something from me, a white man, very empowered in the workplace. You're taking power away from me and you're trying to give it to other people. And I know you're not saying that, but that's what I think this is. And in a way, that's true. It's about making the workplace more fair for everybody. And there was just a tremendous, tremendous amount of backlash against that when people started with it. And so now it's 20 years later. That backlash has just gotten more ferocious. It's more intense now to me than it ever was. So, it's not something that is easily. It's just no getting around the fact that when you want to have honest conversations about race in America and many places in the world, what you're trying to have an honest conversation about is the unequal distribution of power and money. So when you're trying to have a genuine conversation about the unequal distribution of power and money, people who are holding all the power and the money are extremely resistant. They're extremely resistant to these conversations wherever, and they don't even have to be holding all the power and the money. They just want to hold on to whatever power and money they have. And so they're going to be extremely resistant to these conversations. You should know that before you begin to tackle these kinds of conversations. You should understand that the resistance is tremendous. And especially now, it's a very, very divisive conversation now. So when you attempt to have it, people are going to have like a million defenses up. They're going to have a million metaphorical arrows pointed at you with regard to whatever you say. They're going to have metaphorical guns drawn. That's just how it is. So even though I will credit the millennials for creating a tremendous amount of new language to talk about race and inequity in the workplace or wherever, they have created just a tremendous amount of language that was not existence in my heyday. So I'm a Gen Xer. I'm going to say my heyday was, early 90s. That's when I was coming on the scene. I mean, late 90s, early 2000s, that's when I was encountering all of these issues, when I was first encountering the work force. And I can tell you from those encounters that people really don't like any kind of honest conversations around race, sex, gender, inequity. It makes more people really uncomfortable than comfortable. And that's just the truth of it, the matter. But I'm going to link the King Lear video below. Check it out, especially the part where it gets to jargon and language and power and how, people in power have a way of making words meaningless if you're going to be questioning them or asking them or requesting any kind of truth about something they're doing that might not be fair or any kind of equity. That's when you're going to see the words just become very convoluted and very meaningless. And that's what happens within the federal EEO process. The words just become completely meaningless the further you go into that formal EEO process. It's just unbelievably complex and jargon filled and legalistic. And what that's about is sort of allowing the institution that's doing what it's doing. The institution knows what it's doing. The institution knows, we're oppressing people based on race, gender, whatever we can get away with. We're not going to pay everybody the same. We're not going to treat everybody the same. And we're doing this. And let's, we've even given people a process to complain about it. But here's the catch. You absolutely cannot make any sense of your complaints with the language that we've given you to use in this complaint process. So you'll see that process just everywhere in all institutions. There's, this party line. We value and respect everyone here at work. Yeah, that's what they say. Is that what they mean? Almost never. Because it's really, really hard to value and include everyone at work. Our societal structures are not set up to do that. So, if you want to do that, you're heavily pushing against a whole lot of structures. And on top of that, these structures are crumbling right now. We are in late stage capitalism. These structures are crumbling, they're breaking down. So to do that thing is a really, really difficult thing to do. But people are trying. So if you're trying, and I know a lot of people are, that's what I'm here for. I'm here to help people have honest conversations about race, sex, disability, ability, any kind of thing that you feel you need to have a conversation about, or have even an understanding within yourself about. So the understanding has got to come from you, first of all. Let's do it. Let's have these conversations. Bye.